So I just got done with the Penacony storyline, Farewell Penacony, and I figured I'm just going to give a quick summary of my thoughts of the Penacony story arc and how I enjoyed it and some issues that I have with it. And I'm going to go against the grain here and say that I don't really think that Penacony is the greatest gacha story ever told. I don't think it's the greatest Hoyoverse writing that they have. I'm not even going to say that it is the greatest story arc in this very game. I do think Belobog is better than Penacony, and I'm gonna give some examples for that in a bit. And I know that's gonna upset people, because I've already seen it happen online in threads and other creators who do express their dissatisfaction or not hyping up Penacony to be the greatest thing ever, and they get like a lot of hate for it. Hoyoverse players just do not like it when you say something that is not good about the game. Like, it drives them crazy. They go absolutely feral. But yeah, it just feels weird when, you know, I've completed the Penacony story arc and, you know, I see like this overwhelming opinion that it's the best thing ever, and I'm just like, I don't know, is this your first game? Is this your first RPG? As far as like gacha stories go, yeah, sure, it's up there, right? It's by no means bad. It's a good story. I would give Penacony like a solid 8 out of 10. I mean, it had fantastic high moments. It had a lot of high highs, but it also fell into quite a few narrative pitfalls that, I mean, if I'm gonna be honest, if this was by any other company, people would be ripping it to shreds over like some of the narrative choices that, you know, they took. I guess before we get into it, spoilers abound if you haven't played Penacony at all. I'm gonna be talking about a bunch of spoilers. But like a prime example would be the introduction of Firefly. Firefly, adorable character, and she stole the hearts of many people. And I mean, she has like a really cool concept with Sam and everything, but her introduction and her character at the start of Penacony is so incredibly rushed that it's kind of insane. If you really think about it, Firefly is a character that, if we're panning out the Penacony update, the 2.0 update in terms of like episodes, Firefly shows up in episode 1. Right, she has 30 minutes of screen time. You know, we meet Firefly, we encounter Firefly, she takes us around Penacony for a bit, we spend some time at an arcade going on a little date, we go to her secret hideout, right, and then we go on to this little dream trip adventure before we get separated, and then she fucking dies, right? Now of course these deaths are all fake out deaths, but she dies. And, you know, we're shocked. It's a shock value death, because later on we realize that this death is pointless. There's no point to this death other than to purely shock you. And that is bad writing. It just is. Shock value death has no meaning. It's a very poor narrative. And, you know, Firefly's introduction is, you know, a hyper rushed pacing issue of a character we barely met, we barely spent time with. She kind of trauma dumps on us to make us feel sorry for her, and then she died. That's just one of the issues that I have with like the pacing in the beginning. I mean, I still really do enjoy Firefly as a character because of, you know, more of her background of, you know, her being this ancient warrior who fought in the Swarm disaster. That's very interesting. Her gameplay aspect where she fights as Sam, that's also interesting. The implications of like her will to live, like all of that stuff, it's interesting. Our introduction to her, it was rushed. It definitely should have been delivered much better. And then similarly with Robin, we get slapped with this cliffhanger of Robin dying, and it does spur on the kind of the next little mini arc for the next version of, you know, trying to find the murderer. And again, shock value death. Her death has no meaning, because we would eventually learn that, well, you don't actually die. There is no There's no risk of death in this world. So all of this, you know, fear of this enemy, this death entity, it goes out the window. It's meaningless. Finding out who did it, also rather meaningless, because eventually we make our way to the deeper dreamscape area and find her and stuff. So like, it's purely for shock value. It's purely to give you a cliffhanger. On the other hand, we have Aventurine, who we spend an entire patch with Aventurine and learning his backstory and his whole gambit and everything. And they take the opposite approach, where they over-explain everything to an absurd degree. We spend, what, there's like 3 separate still images that were just sitting there listening for somebody, his mom, his sister, his younger self, just yap on for like 15 to 20 minutes. A still image delivering us this tragic backstory of Aventurine. And I'm gonna be honest, it was boring as all shit. Like, it's very understandable. Yeah, tragic backstory, we get it. He was born a blessed child. All of the, like, extinction of his race, he lived through the extinction of his race, slavery, every misfortune that befell him, he lived through it and came out on top because he is the blessed child. Very sad, very touching. It did turn around his character a bit. He became more likable for understanding the reasons why he did it, but Hoyoverse was so heavy-handed in telling his tragic backstory, rather than showing it to us, that that patch itself dragged on tremendously. What they should have done, what they did right for Aventurine's backstory is, after he was poisoned by the Order, posing as Harmony, when he was poisoned by that and was basically dying, following around a phantom of his younger self and his future self, right? That little internal dialogue as he's walking around this amusement park on the verge of death, that was great storytelling, right? Because it was interactive. We're walking around as Aventurine. He's having a conversation with his future self. He's chasing around his younger self. The storytelling is there. You're acting out the storytelling rather than just standing here looking at a still image for 15 minutes as everything's explained to you, or looking at characters talk for, you know, X amount of time, right? So that was like a high moment in the midst of a bunch of like mediocre low moments. And this pattern is repeated for basically every patch. All of the highs, like the cinematics, the confrontations, the boss fights, those are all of our peaks. And yeah, when you say peak Coney or it's so peak, yeah, all of those, sure, those are peak. But the lead up to it, it's so incredibly dry. And I mean, we're not talking about just an hour of leading up to the big moment. We're talking about multiple hours. These patches were 5, 6, 7 hours long, and it's just going through the characters, standing around, talking at you. Very few moments of interesting dialogue. Conversations between Ratio and Aventurine, that was interesting. I enjoyed that. Conversations between Welt and Akron, that was interesting. I enjoyed that. Back and forth between Sunday and Aventurine, interesting. I enjoyed that. Other things where it was just, you know, the whole Mikhail and Misha being Mikhail and the first Trailblaze, like, I'm sure the lore people would appreciate, like, the origins of the 3 nameless that were on Penacony and the founding of Penacony. But I'm gonna be real, that entire sequence, I glazed over that so fucking hard. That was one that I didn't really find all that interesting. And it's just a lot of the conversations that, or dialogues that really didn't add much to push the story forward and all that extra stuff. even with like Shaban in the bar section, that whole like sidebar interlude and talking to Gallagher and all of that, like I again glazed over that. They lost me so hard because I was just it stopped the momentum of the story. And it was like, all right, I want to get past this section so that we can, you know, figure out more what's going on with Sunday and Aventurine, and like I want to get to the good shit, please. That's what I mean by like the pacing of Penacony was just, it was like a constant push and pull in between all of these high moments, you know. Firefly way too fast, Aventurine way too drawn out. These side-tracking segments felt like drawn out. And I think this is just a byproduct of the 6-week update patch cycle that the writers are constraining themselves to. I mean, they, prior to 2.0, they even said that they're going to wrap up Penacony in 2.3. So that means writers have a deadline to fit a whole ass story arc in 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. Penacony is done. Like, they need to have their beginning, middle, and end, have everything wrapped up in those separate 6-week time periods. And that's just constraining for writers. They can't take their time. They can't really flesh out a story and deliver a, you know, properly told story, because now they need to work on the interludes. We're gonna have what, three or four patches of interludes where we go to like other places and, you know, continue storylines and side storylines elsewhere. You know, go back to Lafu, go back to Balabog, maybe, who knows, go back to Penacony for these side stories. And all of that is nice to have, but it does come at a sacrifice of telling a, you know, good cohesive story. And we saw the same issue with the Lafu. The Lafu was all over the place. It was disjointed, and that was primarily because of its patch cycle. And, you know, the reason why I consider Belobog so great is because it didn't suffer from that at all. It launched as a complete story. The writers had Belobog completely written out, beginning, middle, and end, ready to go at 1.0. It launched as this complete story. It was less complicated than the Lafu or Penacony that had a bunch of characters to bounce around from. I think Penacony did better than the Lafu for sure, but it's still the overcomplicated nature of Penacony's storytelling was a little bit more than what the writers could handle. While I do think the concept of having multiple point of views and a more complicated storyline, a darker storyline, is good to tackle, it's just something that at the current pace and capability of Hoyoverse and their writing team, it's just not something that I think they're able to really deliver on at this moment. And it's not to say that I hated Penacony at all. I mean, I did check out in the middle at times, just because I found that they kind of meandered a little too much in between the actual interesting bits of the story. And I would like them to continue to push the envelope in the future. Like, these multiple point of view changes, that's great. I would love them to continue to try and do that. What I need from Hoyoverse is a tighter telling of the story. You know, stop beating around the bush so much. Stop putting out some obvious stretches of dialogue that really just sort of exist to pad the narrative. It really, at times, it just really feels like Hoyoverse writers are, you know, a high school essay, are like writing a high school essay where they're trying to fluff out their word count, you know, to meet their page requirement instead of focusing on telling a concise story. I mean, I personally would rather have a 2.5-hour story of concise storytelling, character building, and pacing rather than a 5-6 hour story that has long-winded dialogue that talks in circles and doesn't and takes forever to get to the actual point of the story that they're trying to tell. I mean, I can understand the need to want to deliver a 5, 6, 7 hour story for a major patch update to keep players occupied for the next 6 weeks, but at the same time, you know, stretching it out that long, I do think the quality does suffer when they do that. And I would really just like Hoyoverse to sort of break up the long-winded dialogue portions just a bit, on top of like making everything more concise and brief, to get the story moving along, because there were so many times during this entire arc that as I'm sitting in a 30, 40 minutes, 55 minutes unskippable dialogue scene, the whole time I'm just thinking, this is a mobile game, right? A lot of people would be playing this on the go. Who's able to sit through a 55-minute dialogue when they're on the go? Like, I would have to commit a day, an evening, just to play through the entire story, or like sections of the story, because by the time you get to a point where you're out of a dialogue and you can actually move around, it's like already been an hour and a half for a lot of these moments. So I would like the Hoyoverse writers to continue to push for complex storylines, darker story themes, you know, all of that is good. I'm not saying that just because I enjoyed Belobog more than Penacony that I want to go back to basically good versus evil basic storyline. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I want a narrative that is well paced, that doesn't drag or rush forward. I would like them to stray away from the shock value moments to sort of hype people up that then later have basically no other impact on the story. You know, I am still excited for the Honkai Star Rail story and where it's going in the future. I'm excited to return to older characters to see what sort of new side stories they have planned for these interlude chapters that we'll be getting before the 3.0. Excited to see what we're going to get for 3.0 version as well. You know, what's this new world going to be like? What's the storyline going to be like? You know, I still greatly enjoy Honkai Star Rail. It's by far one of my favorite mobile games, period. But I'm just not going to buy into or accept the hype that everybody else is pushing for Penacony. I just think that they can do better. So let me know down below what you think of the Penacony story arc. If my opinion at all upsets you, get bent. I don't care. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you for the next one.